Welcome to the 2023 Office of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Training and Technical Assistance Institute. You have entered the session Multi-Partner Evaluation Engagement, Buddies Project, Building Evaluation Capacity. My name is Cherie Moon, and I am the Technical Assistance Manager for ITAC. ITAC provides TA services through a 5-year contract awarded to the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities to provide technical assistance services to councils. Each year, we develop and facilitate a training and technical assistance institute for members of the DD Council Network. Usually we can gather in person, but for the past few years, we have been hosting the institute online. Our goal remains focused on bringing you information that will help you implement the DD Council program in your state or territory. Before we begin, I'd like to do a few housekeeping items. Closed captioning is available. On the bottom of your screen, you should see a square with the letters CC and live transcript. Click on the up arrow and select how you want to see the captions. You can select subtitles and they will show at the bottom of your screen, or full transcript, which will be on the right side of your Zoom screen. As always, the chat feature is available by clicking chat. This allows you to post a message to everyone or to specific people. To post in chat, type your message and hit enter. There will be a question and answer opportunity at the end. Please save your questions for that time. We will have a poll at the end and we would appreciate your participation. Now I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. First, we have Michelle Mitchell. Michelle is the Executive Director of Partnerships for Health. Her career in public health and evaluation began while working in rural HIV/AIDS related clinical trial settings in South Africa. Since then, she has served as the principal investigator for evaluations that range from formative research and informed consent among vulnerable populations to efficacy and statewide program interventions. Next, we have Michelle Munsey. Michelle is an evaluation manager for Partnerships for Health. She holds a master's degree in international development and concentrations in program management and evaluation. Since joining PFHT, Michelle has led formative processes and outcomes evaluation projects that have helped her gain content expertise in performance measures and monitoring and tracking systems. And now I will turn it over to PFH.
Thank you, Cherie. I'm just going to go ahead and share my slides to kick us off. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for having us here as part of your TA Institute. We are very pleased to be here. And as Cherie mentioned, I'm here not just with Michelle Mitchell from PFH, but we have a few other PFH folks on the call who are going to be helping us out today in our session. So I just want to quickly introduce them so everyone can see their faces. First, we have Chad Mitchell. Chad, if you want to just give a little wave wherever you are. He is kind of our IT support for today. And so if you have any tech issues or needs, please feel free to shoot him a message in the chat. Or I believe he can also put his phone number into the chat as well if you need to give him a quick call. And then we also have a few PFH evaluators with us today who are helping to keep us on track and who will be giving a few presentations. So we have Caitlin Allen, Taryn McGray, Jessica Purser, and Marlena Maddox. And we are PFH, and we are working with ITAC on the Buddies Project, which provides evaluation, technical assistance, and training to DD councils across the country. And we do that through what we call Buddies sessions. And I see some familiar faces and names here, so I know at least some of you have been to one of our sessions before. We were playing some slides on Loop when you all joined, and that has a little bit more details on the Buddies Project. So feel free to check those out on the slides that ITAC has posted online. So now let's talk about what we're actually here for today, which is multi-partner evaluation engagement, which is really the process of bringing various partners together for evaluation and conducting evaluations of projects and programs. And this could really be, you know, from deciding what to evaluate, bringing people together to help plan for an evaluation or collect data, all the way down to kind of reporting findings and sharing the results. So, you know, ideally engagement takes place throughout the entire evaluation lifecycle, But having different partners at the evaluation table can really help to produce high quality evaluations and results. But we recognize that it can sometimes be messy and challenging. And so hopefully today's session will give some insight into some useful ways and evaluation approaches that can be used to make sure that all partners feel included. And so we're going to kind of think about evaluation as being like an island or a set of islands, where different partners might be in different areas of the island or on different islands themselves and aren't always super connected. And so we're going to start off today by talking a little bit about this partner landscape. Who are the typical evaluation partners? How do they normally interact with one another? And then as a group, we're going to kind of create some profiles of these avatars of our different partners and start to understand a little bit more about them and what perspectives they can bring to evaluation. We're also going to look a little bit at some of the challenges that they may have kind of interacting with one another when it comes to evaluation. Then PFH team members are going to share a few different evaluation approaches that we've used in the past to help support engagement of all of these different partners. And then we'll wrap up by talking about how these different evaluation approaches could really be applied to various partners to overcome engagement challenges and really start to build the bridges between our islands, if you will, so that all partners can be fully engaged with one another. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to Michelle Mitchell from PFH, who is going to tell us a little bit about the landscape of evaluation partners.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And talking for the older people out here, we had fun learning what avatars and Minesweep and everything was when we were developing this presentation. In part because we're a little bit older, we've had some great, spectacular successes where everyone's worked together and it's been beautiful. And we've had some spectacular, I would say, failures where people have had different agendas, different needs, it's just been more messy. And what we found with evaluation is, by its nature, evaluation is just so much more messier than research. Research, you can often step away, you can be independent, your role is really defined. Evaluation, not so much. And so what we'd like to do today is just kind of unpack those different relationships and then have just some theoretical frameworks that we found have been useful. So first thing we're going to look at is who the different partners are within the world of evaluation. And we typically have a funder because someone's got to pay for the toilet paper, right? Somebody's got to, we need money. So we have a funder. They often will work with subject matter experts and DD councils. And that's kind of like a triad where the communication flows between the three. So, I think of ITAC as subject matter experts. Sometimes people think of us as evaluators, as these people. And that relationship is often defined, and we try and make it that it doesn't change much over time. So while the intricacies might be personality driven in some ways, we all kind of know how each person's role and responsibilities are. Other people who are also really important to the evaluation are the council's grantees or the subrecipients, and the community. And both of those are really where the rubber hits the road. And we try and have a communication that goes from the DDC councils to the grantees, the community. And so we have these two triangles that are often formed. And what we look at for evaluation is, how do we approach these relationships? How do we acknowledge that different roles have different needs, and coming from a strengths-based approach is how do we ensure that everyone is able to maximize the benefits of participating in the evaluation. I often think about it as like in a kitchen, right? Like, how do we decide what we're going to cook? What, everyone's got different food in the pantries. I don't eat meat. Chad only eats meat. So how do we have this negotiation in terms of making sure everyone's nourished, everyone's fed at the end of the day? And that's what we just like to share some of our experiences. And we're going to do this in a way that, if it was a smaller group, we'd go into breakouts and we could do this, but we're going to do this as a big group. It's an experiment. Hopefully it's not too awkward. But we're going to create these avatars. So we're going to create an avatar for funder, for the DDCs, for subject matter experts, sub-recipients or council grantees and community members. And for each of them, we're going to look at what are they really interested in evaluation? Like what, Michelle Munsey loves performance measures. So PPR, she would be super excited about. She loves other things as well, but that's what she's interested in, right? Like that's what makes her job work. Sherry probably really loves the rich stories, and that's what she'd be interested in the findings, and she'd be wanting to be maybe interested in how does she improve a program. So like quality assurance, funders will be different, so each one. So we'll look at what are they really interested in an evaluation? What timeline do they work on? A lot of times we work on 5-year timelines. Funders sometimes have a 20-year timeline, or it might be 4 years, because it might be, a lot of times in Maine, we work from every time the governor's elected, it's a new 4 years. So we work in 4-year cycles. And then what kind of pressures and challenges would they face? So, as subject matter experts, our challenges are probably very different to community members, and in terms of evaluation, what challenges they face, and how do we communicate the results? So that's what we're going to do. And what I'd like you to do is just think about it and maybe jot down some notes on a piece of paper or in the chat, and Michelle's going to switch us over. And we do, as I said, it's an experiment. It's going to work wonderfully. And we're going to jointly create these avatars. And so if you don't put stuff in the chat, it's going to be a pretty awkward conversation. So please add to the chat. Marlena is going to tell us what's in the chat, and Michelle's going to be writing it on the PowerPoint as we talk. Yeah. So let's start with the funder, and we're going to give the funder a name. So the first thing I want someone to write in the chat, and it's finger on the buzzer, right? Whoever gets it there first, let's give this person, this funder, a name.
We've got Diane.
Okay, Diane is our funder. What is she interested in terms of evaluation? And well done to Leilene for getting her finger to their finger to the button first. And yeah.
Interested in numbers of people participating.
Yeah. So they're wanting to look at the reach, right? They're wanting to know, is their money being like reaching people? And is it achieving the outcomes it's intended? Right? The outcomes. The other part I can see people are putting in is just like the impact of the project. And this might be part of the challenges as well but this idea of cost matching impact, because often the pressures that funders face, and Kim, maybe this is part of what you were thinking about, is justifying the funding. So they have to be saying like, yes, whoever's given us the funding, we've used it, we've used it properly, it's achieved, it has been successful, and success based on the mission. They would also maybe be interested in I can't pronounce this word, Marlena.
Replicability.
Thank you. Can we replicate it, right? Can we scale it up? Because, you know, if it works in one setting, is it going to work in other settings? Can we replicate this and achieve the same results? Because sometimes things are so personality driven or so context specific that they may not be replicated. Yeah. So while Michelle's catching up though, Michelle, I think you've got everything there. That's sustainability. That's a really big one. So like, is this sustainable, right? And is the program sustainable? Is the outcome sustainable? So I would say both of those. Michael, not sure which one you were referring to, but I would, but sustainability often is a big priority for funders. So if we look at the time period, what kind of time period are they typically working on? Yeah, so
Annually over 5 years.
I nearly swallowed my tea bag. So yeah, so annually they may have to have reports or things that, because if they're having to justify funding cycles, if it's federal, typically go for 5 years. Really fortunate, I've seen some that go for like 10 to 20 years, but it's long term, right? Like they're not looking at immediate. And this is a really good point about a federal fiscal year, because one of the challenges we often have for evaluation as an organization, we have our contract year, so that's the year that we contracted for. We have the person funding us, their fiscal year, and then we often have their funders' fiscal year. So, and if you're working with sub-recipients, they may have different fiscal years. So figuring out fiscal years, that may, well, is a really interesting part of looking at time periods. How do you think it's best to communicate with them? Like if you want to, you know, do they like big, long technical reports, bullet point summaries? Everyone says everyone loves infographics. But how do you think is the best way to communicate with them?
A long report and then a bite-sized version.
Yeah.
Frequently and briefly, someone
Perfect.
said.
So a long report is often they want all the technical details, because again, if they have to, they probably need those bite sizes to present, but then they have to answer all the hard questions. And so they need, it's like, I must be hungry, but I'm going back to the kitchen, because it's like, it's really good to have the recipe, right? And so I'm just like, yes, the steps, but having more detail about how you do that. So, so that they can also answer questions.
Looks like quarterly reports.
Perfect.
Or
So some kind
update.
Sorry, Marlena. So some kind of regular time. So these are not just like ad hoc when we kind of think about them or when we get this email, but kind of a, you know, I don't want to say rigid because I think it's really useful, but it's on a timeline. It's predetermined schedule. There may be monthly, it may be quarterly. And then the other part is success stories, because I think what they often need is a lot of the numbers, the widgets, the performance measures, and the success stories. And to be able to put that all together in a very brief, concise report can be tricky. One of the things I found is useful, because it's a regular schedule, you can kind of swap around and say, okay, this time it's PPR, well, performance measures, and then follow it up later with this. So you're not trying to do everything at once. And then lastly, if we look at the pressures or challenges they face, Dave, I see conversation stoppers. If you want to, I'm not sure what that means. So I think you mean that's a pressure or a challenge and not the kind of conversation they need.
That's close. I was thinking more of breach in reporting, accurate reporting.
Can you tell me a little bit more so that Michelle Manzi can figure out what to write?
Sure. When there's a grant or something of that nature, the expectation is that communication will be continuous and, as I put above, brief and concise.
Yeah.
But something that shuts the conversation down between the grantor and the grantee is a significant obstruction. That's what I was thinking of when I put conversation stoppers.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
You're welcome.
Looks like time has
Yeah.
a challenge.
Perfect.
Other barriers, what's not working.
So let's move on, and we can expand on that. But let's look at subject matter experts. And Cheryl and Sherry, you can't cheat. So what are subject matter experts interested in? And this, like, we often work with communication experts. Oh, we have to name this person. So fingers on the button. What's this person's name called? Jean. Perfect. So what is Jean interested in terms of evaluation? Okay, Sherry, you can cheat. What are you interested in terms of evaluation? Some of the things I've found subject matter experts are interested in, I'm sure I'm going to jump a little bit, but in terms of time periods, having really real time in the moment evaluation results, because often they want to use the results to refine a program or use it for quality improvement is often the evaluation interest.
We've got outcomes mentioned in the chat a couple times.
So for them, what they're interested in is, like, have the objectives and outcomes been met? Like, and looking at the connection between objectives and results. Yeah, perfect, Michelle.
Accuracy of the data has been mentioned a couple times.
Okay.
And it looks like maybe, does the data tell the story that was intended or expected.
Perfect. And then maintaining fidelity. So I think that's another one is, you know, that often is, I would say, probably one of their primary, in my experience, has been one of their primary evaluation interests. So I know I mentioned in terms of timelines, like this need for real-time evaluation for programmatic refinements. What other time periods, you know, is it short-term, long-term in terms of your experience? Let's leave it at real time for now, because we can't go wrong with real time. What are some of the pressures that they face? In my experience, and this is not an ITAC, but I've often experienced subject matter experts as feeling really divided, where, you know, they're kind of like the middleman that often has to act as the broker between funders and grantees or two different groups. So just that I find is a pressure often faced. So we've got a lot of evaluation interest. Jean may be on in terms of quality improvement. I think we've got that. Need in addition.
Maybe needing time extensions to be able to complete things.
So kind of having their finger on the pulse, right? I think that's kind of where this is, having the, you know, how to best support people that they are providing subject matter expertise to. Communication, what often is their preferred way of getting evaluation results? And if people are confused, emails or phone calls, thank you, Kristen, because I think in part why this might be hard is we don't often think of subject matter experts as part of the evaluation landscape. You know, funders, I think everyone knows funders are interested in evaluation. Councils are, everyone, like subject matter experts, sometimes it's just hard to think of them as part of this group. So let's leave Jean to chat away to, was it Diane? So we'll leave them chatting. Yep, so Jean and Diane, we're leaving them to chat about the beaches on the island. And let's go to the DD councils and let's give this person a name. Ava, yeah. So Ava is a DD council. What is she interested in terms of evaluation? Outputs and outcomes. Michael's spoken like a true evaluator. So outputs, right? We have strategies, we have activities. What is the outputs from our work, right? Simple as in like meetings and presentations, educations, and then outcomes. So all the work we do in, are we having outcomes? So all the work our grantees are doing, you know, are we achieving the outcomes? And what is the ultimate impact on the community? So are we moving the needle in our community? You know, one of the things I didn't say with Jean is, and with Diane, the funder, right? So their perspectives often are across and much broader, where DD councils are very much looking at in their state. So they very much understand what's happening in their communities and wanting to know, like, a lot, you know, a lot about the impact and intended consequences. You know, are their objectives leading to the goals? Proven, like, sustainability. And sustainability, I think, in terms, I've become very aware, and Dev, my apologies if I'm putting words in your mouth, but sustainability often is more than just funding. It's workforce and keeping the workforce sustainable, and the, you know, having the people. Sustainability is also having the credibility in the community, and then reporting compliance. And the other part of sustainability is, you know, will the project continue if the council funding ends? And that, in part, I think, is how you also keep sustainability and your credibility and your relationship in the community. So if we're looking at time periods, what kind of time period are DD councils typically operating on? So 5 years, right, is when the project plans, the 5-year plans. So every 5 years we have a plan. I think some of those 5-year plans, if I've read them correctly, are often broken down into like 18-month smaller projects. But councils do have to show results on an annual basis. So, so both, again, the annual and the 5-year. So it's starting to look a lot like the funder. And so they're needing to report for, so I think part of the evaluation interest, Michelle, I know we haven't said this, but I think it's the accountability is a big part about, like, reporting compliance and the annual reporting. There's an accountability there that the evaluation can be helpful for. Yeah. Communication. What is the best way? And this may be your council boards. You know, when you're thinking of councils, like, documentation, what's worked is, so Kim, I'm going to ask you documentation as in like a big report, a summary, combinations, PowerPoints. We've worked with a lot of foundations that, and I think Kim's saying yes to PowerPoints, because that often is, and it's a really good point of, like, sharing with legislators. And that's part of who becomes your target audience, is often with legislators. The one of the pressures, I think, or challenges, is being able to show it's not just, how do I say this? Well, Kim says it really well, to show it isn't just us saying it works. So that's the problem, is when you have internal evaluation, people will be like, well, you're biased and you're just saying it works well. So I think that's part of just the challenges councils can face. That's, you know, being able to tell the story and have the credibility that it's objective. People have said, in terms of communication, having an executive summary with the full report. So again, like, the full, so this is interesting, Michael, where you've written it here about having a full report in plain language. This is different from what the funders often need. They often need a full report with very technical language. So like we often have to like put what the p-values are and confidence intervals, where for DD councils, you want a full report, but in plain language. And then the slide deck for presentations. Kevin's got a good, interesting point here around social media. And that is maybe a really cool way of getting evaluation results out is through social media. Yeah. Perfect. Any other pressures and challenges people want to note before we move to subrecipients or council grantees? And if you want to get ready to come up with a name for our amazing council grantee subrecipient. Susan, yeah. So council grantees, and I think there may be quite a few, yes. I'm really hoping to hear from you because I've actually never spoken to council grantees, so I'm really interested. I would love to know what you're interested in evaluation. Or not what you are, but what Susan is interested in. Because she's very curious. So they're interested in, I'd 100%, I'm laughing, but ease of data collection, 100%, because, and I've told this very brief story, we always say evaluation is the tail, and the tail shouldn't wag the dog. But often people are, these grantees are the ones are doing the work, and they are not evaluators. Like, you don't get up in the morning and be like, I want to be an evaluator today. So having ease of data collection, 100%, participant satisfaction. So I think there's a lot of, you know, the programs you're doing, the self-advocacy programs, the parent programs, are people satisfied? The having stories that put a personal face and tell a personal story in addition to traditional data points. And this is like joining the dots, right? So council grantees have to make sure they are reporting to make their funder, who is the DD council, happy, so that they can keep getting money. So similar to how the councils have to make their funder happy, right? So it's that knock-on effect. And then two things, accountability again. So showing that we're spending the money correctly, and quality improvement. So having feedback. So if participants are not satisfied, what are they not satisfied about? And how can we refine our program? DC, DDC, I think your point is really good. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. You know, what we've done is we've put all of these different avatars as different. But as council, as DD councils, you are funders. You also work directly with the community. As council grantees or subrecipients, you may have other funders. You may yourself be funders and have mini grants. So a lot of this is we all have different hats. And sometimes it's hard to know which hat to put on and which one you have to please at this moment. Because if you have pressure to make sure that your performance PPRs are correct, you know, that's going to cascade down to the grantees. And so as a funder, you want to make sure that people are spending the money properly, but you also want to make sure that there's a human story behind the data points. So I just thank you again for, Alison, thank you for changing your name. Thank you, Alison. But I think that point of we wear different hats, sometimes these needs conflict. And not only do we have to manage the relationships with people outside ourselves, but we have to manage it within ourselves because we have to prioritize and make choices. Evaluation interests for the grantees are also about, Marlena, that R word again, replicable. Thanks. I'm going to have to practice saying that. So time period, what time period are people normally as council grantees are you working on? What is the average length of a project? Yeah. So about a year. And thanks, Michael. I was about to say, when we work with subrecipients, it normally is about a year, maybe 18 months. And so one of the challenges, I think, what I have found, and I'd love to hear if this rings true to you, is if you have a one-year project, you're not really going to see how it's moved the needle in that year or 18 months. That you may do something this year, something slightly different next year, but sometimes it's a challenge to show long-term outcomes. And yeah, time periods vary, and I think they go in from like 1 year to 5 years. As evaluators, when we have 5-year evaluations, we are very grateful because it allows us to see a more distance, a long-term vision. But you can see if you take the interests in the time period, you have to make decisions, right? Like if you want in really quick results, your data collection is not going to be easy, right? Because you've got to go and do an intense amount of data collection. If you're looking at just some markers over 5 years, your data collection is easier. Participant satisfaction, you probably want immediate. You don't want to wait 18 months to hear that like people didn't like your program. So I think we're starting to just look at some of the challenges and the conflicts and the decisions. Communication. How do you like hearing about evaluation? Long technical reports, challenge sustainability of projects, absolutely lose. And again, I would go sustainability in terms of funding, workforce. Again, I haven't spoken to council grantees, but a lot of organizations we work with, if the funding for a particular project is 12 months and that ends, what happens to the staff who were working on that? And so that it's hard to retain a workforce for sustainability on shorter term funding projects. And staff turnovers. Yeah, Kristen, that often, so the institutional knowledge as well and the lessons learned. So like we continuously learn and try and refine how we do evaluation. But if somebody who's been doing it for 3, 4, 5, 6 years leaves, or if the people that have been there for a long time retire, it's not always written down. And so you've got people making the same mistakes again. And so particularly if the lead person leaves. So lots of challenges. And so just on the pressures and challenges, Michelle, as well, is just limited evaluation experience. And I'm totally adding this, so if people disagree, put it in the chat. But also capacity, if it's just like a 1 or 2 person doing a project, your focus is on getting the project rolled out and making it good and making a difference. So to have the capacity to still then go and evaluate can be hard. Getting participants to fill in surveys, yep, it's really hard. Yeah, I'm going to go back just a little bit quickly to communication. And Marlena, while I'm looking at communication, do you want to see if I've missed anything big? Because I've been trying to keep my eye on it, but something I might have missed something. And Tedra's just remarking about particularly getting surveys done in virtual settings. It was much easier in person. Not everyone is comfortable with virtual. I was just with a group of cancer survivors, and a lot of the survivors were older people, and they're like, I don't know what a QR code is. I thought it was something that I did to get a shopping cart. And so I think it's a really good reminder.
It looks like you touched on everything.
Thank you. Yeah, so let's move to our last avatar and give this person a name. Fingers on the buttons. John. Perfect. So this is John. He is a community member. And what is he interested in evaluation? How well needs were met? Yes, 100%, right? And is this program improving the community? So, you know, this is really like, can I see, feel, touch a difference? And I would also say, like, am I being heard? Can I see myself in the evaluation results? Is really important. And then, Tedra, thank you so much. What is the council going to do with the data? So, you know, this gets a lot to trust, and data hasn't always been used for the greater good. And then how is the evaluation going to inform actions? Yeah. What time period would John want the results, the evaluation findings? Every 5 years? My experience is community, thank you, Kristen, I have the same, as soon as possible. We try and have a 6 week. If we're doing community, we need to get the message out in 6 weeks. On a very practical side, what we found, and we've done some recall phone surveys, is after 6 weeks, people have forgotten they filled in a survey. So when you go back and you're like, oh, here's our results, they're like, okay. So if you really want community buy-in and you want ownership, it's got to be pretty real time, and that it's not put on a shelf, because that's the going back to what is happening in real time and how's this driving action. Communication. What are we looking at? Communication language sensitive, right? So whatever it needs, whatever format of communication, it needs to be language sensitive. I would also add, yeah, that it needs to be image sensitive. When we've been working on on immigrants' experiences in America, the amount of times all people show are like poor, emancipated, or skinny looking Black people. And I just think it's like you perpetuate stereotypes. So the communication, I think it needs to be language and image sensitive. And what are some of the pressures John might face that when he's talking about, or challenges when he's with the evaluation results? And while people are thinking, Michelle, the other part in communication is having like a press release, electronic media. What we've done before is done a poster. And in all, when we've collected, when we've collected survey responses in a community, putting out posters with some of the results. In my experience, some of the pressures or challenges I've found people like John may have is looking at like why is evaluation a good way to spend money? Because money can be spent in a lot of different ways. It can be spent in terms of program improvements. It can be spent in terms of services. So why I'm not going to say wasting, but like out of everything you're going to use your money for, like, is it really a good use of money to put it into evaluation? Is some of the pressures and challenges we have. The other part is some of the pressures and challenges can be stigma or for even participating in the evaluation, and understanding the evaluation, like really understanding what's been asked. So thank you. I think this was very helpful. And what I'm going to do is Michelle, if you can go to the next slide, just think about, I think we're out of time to really do it as a group, but if you want to put it in the chat, Michelle can fill in this slide, but it's just, I think the point here is saying, funders can experience challenges navigating relationships with subject matter experts, with councils, with grantees, with communities. And so just naming those sometimes. One of the things I find is sometimes funders are intimidated by subject matter experts, because particularly evaluators and researchers, we can have all this own jargon of our own. And, we think we're very smart and we know our jargon. And as a funder, you need to understand each of the different ways and frameworks and jargons of speaking. So what did we do the other day? It was so interesting. I think we were doing a focus group, and what I refer to as a focus group, what media people, communication subject matters refer to as focus groups, was so different. And so sometimes for funders, it's just the different language, and they have to kind of know a lot of different glossaries and acronyms. Funders I would say with council grantees and communities, is just it's really hard for them to know what's actually happening on the ground. Like there's often, one of the challenges is there's no direct line of communication. And so hopefully those are some examples of challenges from the different relationships and how people engage. And a lot of times they work beautifully, and a lot of times they don't. And I think that's the point. What we just going back to is how do we understand that? And it's it's not a judgment thing. I think that's what I've learned in 20 odd years of doing this. Is it doesn't mean I'm a bad person or my funder's a bad person. It just means we're coming from different perspectives. We have different agendas. We have different times that we need information. And what we try and do is look to theory, because when you look at theory, it's so different because it's not personal. You know, maybe the theorist who wrote it had a bad experience or a good experience. So maybe for them it's personal. But what it does for us is it gives us this non-subjective framework that can just help us think about it and make it not personality driven. And that's what we're going to spend some time doing now. And I think there's probably a lot of different ways that we can approach this. But we're going to really just focus on 3. And so I understand this is driving a bus. So I've moved away from my kitchen. I'm now on a bus. So collaborative evaluation, the evaluator is the bus driver. And so they want to make sure everyone's on the bus. No one's left stranded behind. Want to make sure everyone feels safe on the bus, like everyone's sitting down, that no one's kind of feeling isolated, but they really have got the wheel and they're driving. And that's collaborative evaluation. Participatory evaluation is everyone takes turns driving the bus. As long as everyone's on, someone may be putting in the GPS coordinates, someone will make sure there's gas, someone will be driving, everyone will switch, change it up, and they'll work together. The third way is empowerment, and this is where the evaluator, they make sure the bus is roadworthy and it's got gas in it and it's got everything, but they're really taking a back seat. You know, maybe they're sitting behind the driver and making sure they don't fall asleep, or, you know, if they need food, they pass them food, but that's where, that's the evaluator's role in empowerment. And it's easy for us to look at evaluator as a separate role, but I do want to acknowledge that often the evaluator is internal. So they're part of a DD Council team. And I think as an organization, it's useful to say, okay, for this evaluation, what is our approach? And what role do we want our internal evaluator to play? Because all 3 of these are inclusive. They are on different levels of participatory and also different levels of responsibility. So collaboratively, the buck stops with the evaluator. If it's broken and it doesn't work, it's the evaluator's fault. For participatory, responsibility is shared, but you have to also check in that it really is truly shared. And empowerment, you know, the evaluator gives up a lot of responsibility. So I think it's useful to think about each of them. But I'm pretty sure before you can think about them, you need to know more about them. And so I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Munsey, and she's going to start us off talking a little bit more about empowerment, evaluation, and then we'll move on to the other 2. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome to the Empowerment Evaluation Bus. So as Michelle Mitchell just mentioned, empowerment evaluation really pulls all evaluation partners together more so on an even playing field, right? Everyone's perspectives and expertise are valued and they're just as important as each other's. And the whole idea behind empowerment evaluation is that it really aims to increase the chances of a project or a program being successful and in reaching the intended outcomes by making sure that all of the different partners who are involved have the tools and resources that they need to plan for, implement, and evaluate the project. And then through that process, empowerment evaluation also helps to embed evaluation and evaluative thinking as a more kind of mainstream and systematic part of a team's kind of project management and planning. And so there's a few key concepts that guide empowerment and evaluation, and I want to touch on kind of just a few of them. The first being this idea of a critical friend. And so this kind of goes completely in line with what Michelle Mitchell was just saying. In empowerment evaluation, your critical friend is the evaluator or the partners on your evaluation team who are maybe a little bit more evaluation savvy, have a little bit more experience. And their role is, like Michelle said, to let everybody else drive the bus and make the decisions, but to make sure that the bus stays on the road, to make sure that the evaluation is rigorous and organized, but really they are there in kind of a supportive and encouraging role. And then the remaining kind of key concepts focus largely on, the importance of using evidence to inform decisions throughout the evaluation process, as well as kind of continuously reflecting and applying what you've learned to make changes and improvements. So how do we do empowerment evaluation? There are kind of three primary steps to this process. And throughout all three steps, the partners are working very collaboratively. So regardless if they're a funder or an expert or a council, community, grantee, whoever, it's an incredibly collaborative process. So the first step is the partners come together and really determine the mission and values of their work. And they really have to come to a consensus on this. So this is really determining what's important to partners, where do they want to go? And then it really kind of keeps partners grounded in these common values. Step two is called taking stock. And to take stock, partners need to brainstorm different activities that are needed to help achieve that mission and achieve the programmatic goals. So they can ask themselves, how do we get there? How do we move from A to B? And then the second part of taking stock is really kind of prioritizing that list. It's a very tangible and concrete process where you take your list of activities and you rate them and vote on them. And so this is usually done by allowing partners to each have a certain number of votes. So partners, let's just say, for example, each partner has 5 votes. Partners can choose to put 1 vote towards 5 different activities on your list because they think they're all equally important, or they can take 3 of their votes and put it towards one activity and then 2 votes and put it towards another, so on and so forth. Then the partners will all kind of congregate and have a discussion about why they voted the way that they did, what was their reasoning, what kind of contextual factors aided in that decision. And then they'll also have the opportunity to change their vote. So once all the votes are in, everything's kind of tallied up and they identify the top 10 activities just based on who got the most votes. And those become kind of the key activities that are needed to help achieve the goal. So then from there, the final step is planning for the future and starting to come up with some goals, some strategies, and what evidence might be needed to determine if the project is achieving its mission. So oftentimes this kind of requires folks to revisit that mission and vision that was established in step 1 and make any adjustments based on that rating process they went through in step 2. And so then at the end of this empowerment evaluation process, the group would have a list of kind of actionable strategies and a plan to achieve them. And then all partners really have committed to implementing and reviewing this regularly. So empowerment evaluation is grounded in kind of 10 key principles that really inform the process. So not only does this approach really aim to develop strategies for programmatic performance improvement, but it also intends to improve partners' evaluation capacity and knowledge. So it's not just programmatic, but also kind of this internal capacity building as well. The approach also aims to have partners and community members own the process. So those of you who are involved in the process, you really own it. You become committed to it. It, like Michelle said earlier, it's very inclusive. It brings together diverse partners and promotes inclusivity and participation from all. And along similar lines, given that all partners kind of have the same level of input, empowerment evaluation really promotes a democratic participation process and decision-making process. So really everything happens as a team. And then given that focus on equity and inclusivity, empowerment evaluation also really promotes social justice by making sure, that equity and disparities are being considered throughout the process. And so the knowledge of all the partners in empowerment evaluation is really critical. And that knowledge from community partners and from other partners is coupled with evidence-based strategies to really have a solid and strong base of evidence. And then we already mentioned that capacity building is really a huge component of empowerment evaluation, as the whole approach is really kind of designed to support programmatic partners and evaluation partners' abilities to do evaluation and improve their projects and programs. And then if we think back to a few of those concepts I just mentioned, one of those was continuous reflection and kind of continuous learning. So that really promotes this idea that no matter who you are, no matter which partner you are, you can always keep reflecting on the process and continuing to learn from your experiences. And then finally, while empowerment evaluation is a really flexible and dynamic approach, it's still very much focused on outcomes and accountability and ensuring that the program or the project is achieving its goals. So that is the kind of very brief, high 30,000 foot level intro into empowerment evaluation. And I'm now going to send it over to Caitlin, who's going to tell us a little bit about participatory evaluation.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome to the participatory evaluation bus. On to the next one. So with participatory evaluations, this is a stakeholder-driven approach in which program planners and participants are actively engaging with an evaluator to implement an evaluative process. So with this approach, it aims to enhance the evaluation use by increasing the depth and range of participation. So with this, decision-making and leadership of the process is beginning with the evaluator, and then over time is shifted to the program stakeholders. The level of stakeholder participation can vary widely, so it kind of depends on the purpose of the evaluation. But participation can occur at any stage of the evaluation process, such as in the design, data collection, analysis, and then in the reporting phases. The big thing about this is that the emphasis of stakeholder involvement should be on the meaningful participation of all participants, ensuring that the evaluation is addressing relevant questions that can help inform the program's improvement. So how do we do a participatory evaluation? There's a total of 5 steps. So what the first step is to determine whether or not this type of process is appropriate. When you're doing a participatory evaluation, it requires additional time, resources, and commitment from partners to ensure that they're fully engaged throughout the steps. So some considerations to think about when determining whether or not it's appropriate is to think about the interest of other partners in the evaluation, leadership or funder support, and then determining whether there's an adequate timeline to actually carry out the evaluation process. With the second step, we're looking at selecting and preparing an evaluation team. So this requires a broad range of partners and stakeholders. These partners and stakeholders could include people such as program staff, evaluators, leaders, community members, funders, individuals with lived experiences, and more. With this, it's really important to include people from different roles, knowledge, and power within the program context, especially including people that are most affected by the program. With this, it's helpful to understand the potential group dynamics because it can play a role when preparing the team and then identifying and delegating roles and responsibilities. You want to ensure that the team and work group have aligned goals and a shared understanding of the evaluation process. With the third step, we're working on the evaluation process. It's to collaborate on creating the evaluation plan. So collectively as a group, with direction from the evaluator, the group will work on defining the evaluation process, identifying the evaluation questions, selecting indicators or measures that are important to measuring these evaluation questions. And then the group will agree on a study design or appropriate way to collect the information and create a plan for the data collection, analysis, and interpretation and reporting. The fourth step is involves conducting the data collection and analysis. It's important when determining data collection methodology that you're going to choose a data collection method that builds on the team's strengths and maximizes team participation. And then the last step in the process deals with sharing results and developing an action plan. Partners should collaborate on the best way to have a shared understanding of the evaluation results and have a collaborative approach to disseminating the findings. So lastly, I want to touch on very briefly the 9 different principles to participatory evaluations. So the first principle is participant focus and ownership. So with this type of approach, this seeks to create structures and processes to engage and create ownership among all key stakeholders. So this process seeks to honor the perspectives, voices, and knowledge of those most impacted, including the participants and recipients. This also goes into negotiation and balance of power, which is a big star around this one, as participants need to commit to work together to decide on the evaluation approach and ensure that there's a balance of power among team members, and that as well as the evaluator to determine each step of the evaluation process. With learning and flexibility, the team is working together to learn about what is working with the program and what's not, and is flexible and able to change the evaluation design based on the resources, needs, and skills of participants. With focusing on action planning, the main purpose of participatory evaluation is to identify these points of action to help improve program implementation. With sharing control, everyone is at the table with this type of evaluation approach. So everyone's involved in the program and they share control over the evaluation process. This is done by setting objectives jointly in a group with all people concerned being involved and working out the difficulties together, because that not only strengthens individual capacities, but strengthens the program overall. And then lastly is awareness raising, which this is the process of collecting awareness raising surrounding the program implementation and then those impacted. So that's a very brief overview of participatory evaluations. Now I'll turn it over to Taryn to discuss collaborative evaluation.
Thank you, Caitlin. So now let's hop on the collaborative evaluation bus. So this describes an approach where the evaluators are the bus drivers, so to speak, of the evaluation, but they're still working together and providing ongoing support and engagement between the evaluators and the stakeholders. You can see here the framework for collaborative evaluation. An important concept here is the need to just identify the situation, especially identifying who the stakeholders are, who should be involved, who might have interest in the evaluation. It's also important to clarify expectations and establish a collective commitment. So basically just make sure that everyone involved is on the same page. And then throughout the evaluation process, you want to prioritize having open communication between everyone, encouraging effective and fair evaluation practices, and making sure everyone is following a specific set of guidelines, the same guidelines. So these might be principles or standards for evaluation that everyone is aware of and can follow. So the next slide, you'll see there's 4 main steps. And within each of these steps, the collaborative framework from the previous slide can and should be applied. So the first step is to review the program status. At this step, you're learning and asking and answering different questions. You want to think about what are the cultural, political contexts that the program operates within. Are there any existing evaluations done? What's already been done? And what was the previous experience with evaluation at the program? So is there any culture of evaluation, or is this a brand new process? After gaining that information, the next step is to develop the evaluation plans. So this is going to lay out what the evaluation will do and making sure that the evaluation is doing what we want it to do. And so to do this, the program will develop a logic model, and the evaluator will provide feedback and provide TA to complete the logic model as needed. Then of course, we have to implement the evaluation. This starts by identifying common assessment needs. This is typically done by the evaluator, and then we'll develop data collection tools. So this is also done by the evaluator with a lot of input from the program. Now, once the data is collected, it's useful to allow the stakeholders the chance to review the data, and this makes the process just more transparent and actively engages the stakeholder throughout. And similarly, it's useful to involve the stakeholders in data analysis. And this can help to make sure that the evaluators are accurately and appropriately interpreting the data collected. And so now that you have done your evaluation, what next? It's just as important to share the evaluation findings. And this can be done by presenting evaluation results far and wide, so at community events, state events, or even national or international conferences. It's also useful to develop site-specific reports or summaries, some of those communication tools we already discussed. And by sharing these evaluation findings, you're not only sharing the knowledge that you gained, but you're also celebrating the accomplishments of everyone involved and making sure that all stakeholders have access to those evaluation findings. On the next slide, you'll see, you've already seen with the other evaluation approaches, there's a set of guiding principles. So for collaborative evaluation, there are 7 principles. Development is using training or mentoring for self-improvement of everyone involved. Empathy refers to practicing empathy to manage a really positive environment for that collaboration. Empowerment refers to developing self-efficacy among everyone involved. Involvement is pretty self-explanatory. This is just making sure that everyone is involved and contributes meaningfully and in ways that complement everyone's individual strengths and weaknesses. Qualification is also kind of self-explanatory. So this refers to making sure that everyone has the knowledge and skills needed to collaborate. And this is not only just background qualifications, but just making sure that everyone involved is prepared appropriately to participate. Next is social support. This is really important in managing relationships of everyone involved and ensuring that everyone feels a sense of belonging and feels comfortable working together. And last but not least is trust. So it's important when working collaboratively to have a confidence in each other and be able to rely on each other. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle.
Thank you. And I know we've spoken about 3 frameworks really superficially, just, you know, I think of it as like a menu. There's different options, and there's lots of books that have been written by on these different frameworks. There is a great part of the ITAC website is just on the Buddies program, and I think these slides will be put there, and we'll have a list of resources as well. There's some good YouTube videos, as well as some books to read. And so I'm going to just touch on being practical and being transformative. If we had endless amounts of time, endless amounts of money, we would all want to do transformative work. Like, I don't think there's anyone that does any DD work that doesn't want to be transformative. We want to change things. Sometimes you just have to be really practical. And so one of the most useful things, I think, is just being deliberate about it, and being able to say, okay, for this evaluation, this is a short project, we need to quickly have data so we can get some additional funding, or we can refine a program. That maybe you just want to be practical, and you just want to, you know, use collaborative, I think it is, when the evaluator's driving the bus, Taryn's model. So then, you know, if you've got more time and you intend to spend longer on the project, you're looking at scaling it up, focusing on transformative. The other part is, if a new group of people get together, I often find focusing on being practical, doing a short evaluation that gives people success is transformative. So, you know, I've got them as like 2 different, but they really do practical implications and practical, very short evaluations where you don't have a lot of time to do empowerment can be transformative. And the flip side of that is, I think a lot of times people say we do empowerment, but really it's what you're doing is window dressing. And so I think there's an honesty there with just being like, we would love to do transformative. Practical, at the moment, we can't. And so, but we're being conscious and we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. There's, regardless of which approach, you've got to have credibility in a community. We can't parachute into a community, do evaluation, parachute out. Nobody trusts us. So if you don't, you need to have relationships and have a credibility to develop trust. People are not going to participate in any evaluation if they don't trust you. If people don't participate, they're not going to feel a sense of ownership. And ultimately, what we really want is for people to use the evaluation. And if they don't feel that sense of ownership, they're not going to use the evaluation. So I think that kind of wraps us up with the 3 different frameworks. What we'd love to hear from from you, either if you want to unmute yourself or put it in the chat, is looking at what advice you would have to your fellow colleagues to these different avatars. There was Diane, John, Ava, I can't remember the different people. Michelle, you might have to remind us. But for each different stakeholder, each different partner, what advice you would have for them. And so while you're thinking about that, I'm going to put Michelle Munsey on the spot and ask her on your empowerment bus. Thank you, Leilin. We had John, Diane, Ava, and Susan. Michelle, if you are from the empowerment bus, what advice would you have for how to promote evaluation engagement between funders and DD councils?
It is a good question. And I think my answer might apply to empowerment evaluation, but also maybe to some of the other frameworks as well. But I think if I was thinking about a funder, I could imagine that evaluation engagement for them might be a little bit challenging, because a lot of times they might not be involved in a project the same way that other partners are, right? Like Michelle was mentioning, a lot of times funders don't have, a direct link to the community or a direct link to the grantees. So their roles sometimes might feel a little bit different, but I think empowerment evaluation is a great way to pull them in, because as we talked about, it really kind of puts everyone on an even playing field. I think my advice to keep funders and councils engaged with one another is to really identify the commonalities, their common interests in evaluation. As we were going through earlier and doing the profiles for John and Diane and Ava and such, I was really struck by how accountability was kind of one of the key pieces across so many different partners. And that's one of the primary principles of empowerment evaluation. And so I think identifying the places where funders and other partners like councils have that common interest and really kind of playing to that is a key piece. If they are both interested in the same thing, if they both kind of have the same goals when it comes to evaluation, they could be really working on that engagement. I think capacity building is another piece as well, which is such a critical component of empowerment evaluation, to really be supporting capacity building for funders, for grantees, for councils, so forth and so on. So I think my general advice is finding that common ground would be a good way to keep them engaged with one another.
I'm going to ask any of the participants if there's any advice. I don't see anything on the chat, but if anyone wanted to unmute themselves, what's worked for you? And if I don't hear anything, because I know we've got a few minutes, Caitlin, what do you have any advice for us on DD councils and their grantees, so DD councils and subrecipients? And while Caitlin's talking, there's a poll. Please take the poll, be good evaluators. We're all in this together. So thank you, Sherry, for doing that. And Caitlin, if you could chat to us about councils and their grantees.
Of course.
Participatory evaluation.
Yeah, of course. So with the participatory evaluation approach, one of the benefits of it is that we're bringing all of these different voices to the table and everyone's on the same playing field. One of the challenges that can come with that is differences in power dynamics and possibly having, trying to find a way to have negotiation and a balance of that power. So a lot of times the way to kind of address those different power dynamics is to have an open conversation and acknowledge and talk about some of those challenges and just bring them straight to the forefront. Another way to address those challenges is to focus on the action component of the evaluation, and because the action to make changes in the community is where all the different stakeholders are going to find that common ground and that common point to jump off from. So yeah, my advice would definitely be having shared ownership and making sure all the voices are at the table and are able to share their voices.
Thank you. And because I don't want Taryn to feel left out, Taryn, can you maybe give us some advice about grantees and community members and really community engagement from a collaborative evaluation, which is the really hard one actually out of
yeah, I mean, I think when thinking of like how to overcome challenges, a lot of the guiding principles are like very fancy buzzwords that get thrown around a lot. And I think it's important to remember that each of them do have a really significant meaning and a purpose in collaborative evaluation. So it is really important to focus on those. Like I know someone had mentioned making sure everyone's voices are heard, all the different voices are heard. For collaborative evaluation, when you think about what it is, yes, the evaluators are the bus drivers leading the evaluation and getting support from the community, but that support goes both ways, right? So these principles show us that the evaluators are still supporting the people on the bus, the community members, all those other stakeholders. So it's really useful if you're having trouble, maybe thinking about, are you supporting those stakeholders in the way that they need to be involved? I think the last thing that I'd like to mention is just, we say this often, it's just that in this kind of evaluation, you move at the speed of trust. And so using that trust and really focusing on that as like a building block, kind of a foundation point to build off of. And that trust it's not like a linear process, right? So you might have built trust and maybe it's broken later because of something that happened in the program or the evaluation, or even the broader context of just what's going on in the world. So it's important if you're having like struggles, hearing everyone's voices, maybe asking yourself, well, is there still trust going on? And what can I do to build that trust back up again?
Thank you. And I think we time, so before Jessica mutes me, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes, we have about 3 minutes left. So I want to just do a very quick wrap up and reiterate something Michelle said. I know that we only gave a very high level intro into each of these frameworks, but hopefully it started to kind of get your brains thinking about some of the ways you might be able to apply some of these frameworks to engaging different partners in some of your evaluation work. And like Michelle said, we have a slew of resources that can dive a lot deeper into each of these. And so we can definitely get those shared with ITAC and shared on the website so that you all have access. And then the last thing that I would like to do to wrap up is for all the folks from DD Councils on the call, I do just want to share about our next buddy session that's available to you all. It is planned for Thursday, August 17th at our usual time from 3 o'clock to 4:30 Eastern time. And during that session, we're going to dive even more into different evaluation frameworks and looking at different ways to evaluate policy changes and such. So once we get a little bit closer to August, we will get that registration link sent out. But that wraps it up for us. And I think that Sherry and Cheryl launched their poll. So please, before you head out in the next 2 minutes, complete the poll so we can all be good evaluators. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for participating and sharing that great information with everyone today.